Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. We're working on some quilt repair today, so if you want to see how I repair this rail fence quilt, please stay tuned. Here's the quilt that I'm going to be doing some repairs on today. This is actually my son Carter's quilt. He's the senior. He asked me to do some repairs on it. Backstory of this quilt, I think it was made in 2007 or 2008. It was one of my first quilts, and at the time that I made it, I didn't know that I was making a rail fence quilt. I just drew out some blocks on my paper and colored them in. Asked him what his favorite color was, or favorite colors were, and he told me, and so I made a quilt in those colors. And then it wasn't for a few years later that I found out that it actually had a name, and it's called the rail fence. Um, since it was one of my first quilts, I made some mistakes on it, so I'm gonna put it on the table and then zoom in a little bit so I can show you um, some ways to improve on that I could have improved on this quilt, and some of the repairs that I'm gonna make. I pulled the quilt onto the table so that we can talk about some of my mistakes that I made when I was making this quilt. I used to, when I first started quilting, I used to write everything down in this notebook, just a little red binder. And I didn't, the only thing I couldn't find was the actual picture of the quilt that I drew it out and I colored it with crayons. And so I named it the crayon quilt because I made it by coloring with crayons. But I listed all of my little measurements. I did the strip sets. So I listed what the strip sets would be, all of that. So it would be kind of easier for me to manage. But I did make a few errors with this quilt. Like I said, it was probably like my second or third quilt, and there were some nuances with the rail fence that I didn't know. The first thing that I didn't know was about measuring the strip set after you get it sewn, measuring it, and then using that measurement to determine your blocks. Instead, I had a pre-measurement in my mind, and I cut them, instead of cutting them into squares, I cut these sections into rectangles. So if you look at if you look at the supposed intersections on my quilt, that none of them actually match because they just don't match up. So if you look here at this little section, instead of it just coming to a solid point, it just kind of has a line and then 2 points at this intersection. And then you notice it as well over here and all over the quilt. If you look carefully, none of the seams actually match up. And with a rail fence, that's a part of the process, that it does match up. Another thing was, let's see, that I was not very careful with my seam allowances. So some of the repairs that I'm going to have to do are going to be more challenging because I wasn't using a real 1/4 inch seam. I'm not really sure exactly what it was, because this quilt is so old. Um, but it was not as big as a 1/4 inch. So as I go through making my repairs, some of them I won't be able to do, or they're going to be difficult to just stitch together because of the seam allowance. I did free motion quilting. I don't know if we can get any of the quilting on camera, but I did sort of a meander with free motion, but I used the clear nylon thread, and I wouldn't do that now, but that's what I did. I thought I was being fancy, and I did clear thread because I didn't want it to be seen. So I don't know, can we zoom in and see if we can see the quilting? I don't know if the camera's going to get it, but like here in the red and orange, like for me it's really clear right here. So you can kind of see the quilting, but it's just not, you can't see the thread because of the nylon thread. Another thing that I did then that I wouldn't do now is I use polyester batting. And after I repair it, you won't be able to see it, but here is the polyester batting. and it's kind of coming apart here. Now I use my 100% cotton batting. But you know, you live and you learn, and this was a great experience for me. I love this quilt. My son loves this quilt, and that's why he wants me to repair it. So um, for the repairs, I'm only going to do two types of repairs. I'm actually going to repair some of it with the blind stitch, and let me show you um, how I'll know if I can do that. This little section right here is just a little open section. It has a little gap in the fabric, and like if I pull this out, you can see that seam allowance is not quite a 1/4 inch, but I'm going to be able to overlap the fabric and just stitch the blind stitch right along the edge here, and then I can do it down here where this green is as well, but I'm not sure because that fabric is torn. I may have to do a patch there. um, I'll see what I can do. And there are a few other areas that will use the blind stitch, and that won't be too bad. The other kind of repair that I'm going to have to do is to patch it. So this section right here that I showed earlier, like this part right here, there's enough to overlap, and so I might let that overlap. But when I look at this section, for me to overlap it, it could be a little bit difficult because that seam allowance is just, there's like nothing there. So um, we'll start probably with the blind stitch, and I'll show you how to do that, and then I'll move to the patches at the end of the video. I've already patched a little part of this, not patched, but repaired part of this quilt, just so I could practice my blind stitch and see if it was going to work. So this is the part that I've done. I did this part here, and then right under here. I'm going to put a picture of it before and after here so that you can see what it looks like. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you how I do another section. I'm going to do next this little part here because I can stitch it up. I don't have to put a patch over it. So let me zoom in a little bit. Before I do that, I'm using, I have Orfil thread here. It's color 2600. It doesn't matter. You're not going to see the stitches. But this is what I'm using to do my repairs on this quilt. I have my needle here. This is just a needle, nothing special about it, I don't think. It may be a little thick, but I don't really, it's not going to matter that much. And then I'm going to be repairing using 2 strands of thread. So I put the thread through the needle, and I'm going to knot it at one end so that I can get started. So let's zoom in, and then I'll show you how I do this process. All right, let's get started with this. I've already knotted the end of my thread. This is actually, I'm using the blind stitch, so it's the same stitch that I use when I need to finish off binding by hand. And I'm really hoping that you can get in and see this. I'm left-handed, and so what I'm hoping is that you can see without me getting in the way of the stitches. But I'll talk you through it, and I almost feel like I need to go through the other side, but we'll just see. I'll do it, and then if it works, then it's fine. All right, so what I'm going to do, I have my my needle here. Just making sure you still see. Okay. And then since this has already been washed and everything, you kind of have to pull it tight just to make sure that it's going to fit. It shouldn't really be an issue, but keep in mind that you have to, that as you're stitching, like as I stitch this, I have to keep in mind that it's going to have to be stretched out so that it all fits back in there. But it will fit. I just have to be mindful of that. Now I'm actually going to start a little bit away from where the actual thread is, or right before it's where the threads come out. So I'm going to start over here a little bit. I'm going to take my needle. I'm going to come in probably about a 1/2 inch away, maybe a little more. And I want to go just above the stitch line. Alright, and I'm just pulling that thread through. And then the knot is at the end, and I'm going to pull so that that knot comes right back to where I'm working. Okay, so now I'll start my blind stitch. I'm going to hold this kind of tight, and then I'll take my needle and I'm going to bring it up through the back fabric, and then I want to get it in between the layers of this seam allowance in the front fabric, and then just push it through. I hope that well, no, I didn't do it that time. So it's like a really tiny bite in the red fabric, but I'm going between layers on the black fabric, if I can do it. There we go. So let's try this again. Let's see if we can do it. So again, I've already, this is about halfway through, but I just want to show you how to make that stitch. I want to make sure we can get it. So all I'm doing is I'm taking my thread, and I'm going to take a small bite through that red fabric, and then go between the layers on the black fabric. Very small stitch, maybe a 1/4 inch, more like, usually more like 1/8 of an inch, closer to 1/8 of an inch. And then again, small bite, and in between the layers. If you end up seeing your thread, you know, it's okay unless it bothers you. If you're really concerned and you can see it, then I would switch to one of these colors, probably, since it's black and red, probably the black I would switch to, because that's what would be poking through on the top. But it really doesn't matter, because once I wash this quilt, you won't be able to tell where it was repaired, except for the patches, because the patches will be really obvious. But these minor repairs on the seam line, they won't be recognizable. Alright, so I'm just going to take a second and just check it and make sure that I haven't pulled too much. Alright, and just holding it tight, but making sure that back fabric is down in the seam allowance so we don't lose it again. Alright, back through here, and in between the layers on the black. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of this off camera and show you how to end the stitch. I'm at the end of my little section, so I want to go over how I finish it out. It's really not a big deal. I'm just going to give it one more stitch. And I've gone a little bit past where I can see my original thread. But here's my stitch, and then, let's pull it through. And then I'm just going to tie a knot. I'm just pulling this through, yeah. Alright, so then I'm just going to tie a knot in the thread, but not so that it goes all the way to the end. So maybe about a 1/2 inch from the end is where I want it to stop. Okay, so you can see, here's the knot right here. And then I'm going to just take my needle and draw the thread further out than the knot. So maybe about 1 inch this time. And then pull that knot through and snip my thread. So here we go. Just pulling it. That knot's going to go through that fabric, hopefully. Well, it's not yet. Let's see what's going on. Oh, okay, there's a second knot. And this does happen, so I don't really get stressed out about it. Okay, so now I've pulled it so that it's all even. So it's just the one knot now. There we go. And then I'm going to snip the thread here, which locks that knot in between the layers of fabric. All right, so that's a simple repair for the blind stitch. So I'll go over quickly. Well, actually, I'll probably just show a patch. I've done a patch before on a video, but I'll just show one. I'll get this whole quilt repaired, and then I will show you what it looks like. I completed all of the blind stitch repairs that I need to make, I think. It took probably about an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes to do all of those. There were probably 10 or 12 of them, but they were really short. The longest one was probably about 2 inches, maybe. So I'm on my last little stretch. The only thing that's left to do is there's some repairs that can't be, well, that I can't repair just by stitching them together. So I'm going to zoom in on those. Let's see, here's one. And let's see if I show it, you can see that there's really no seam allowance. There's nothing for this to grab onto. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this patch here. My son likes the white and gold team across Atlanta. So he can have this patch, and I'm just going to press it on all 4 sides so that it's a nice rectangle, and I'll use the same blind stitch to go around this section. There's one more part that needs to be done, and that is this one here. Let me see if I can get to it. Yeah, right here. So right here, you can see that it's kind of coming up here, so I could blind stitch that, but if I'm going to put a patch over it, there's no need for that. And I'm just going to take this scroll fabric, again pressing on all 4 sides and blind stitching around it. So let me get those done, and then I'll show you the finished quilt. I finished putting the patches on the quilt. You can see them right here. And what I like is they sort of blend in, even though you can tell it's a patch, the colors sort of go. And this is a special touch because I know he likes this team. This one is just a sort of matching green, but I think it's going to be fine. I didn't show you the back of the quilt. So this is the back, and it has the binding is a black, and it has little polka dots on it of different colors. So when I got this fabric, I felt like it all coordinated well, and it repaired nicely. Hopefully these repairs will make it last for a little while longer for him. I am considering putting a label on it before I wash it, because right now it doesn't have a label, and I think it would be important to document the date that I think it was made, which was around 2008, and then document the date that I made around the repairs on it. So that's probably coming up soon. There are a few set in marker stains, and I'm going to do maybe some research to see how I might get those out for him. It hasn't bothered him, so I think he'll be fine. But I'm just excited to have it done. It was taking up space in my sewing area, and so I'm glad that I have it done. If you have any questions about what you've seen, leave them in the comments below. Thumbs up this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!